I just recently did a video talking about a place in Texas called Vidor, Texas. I now know the pronunciation of it, thanks to my subscribers for correcting me. And based on just that comment section alone, that was a video that interesting video based on just the comments. And the reason I say that is because I had a lot of feedback just on the town of Vidor alone. Now, I'm not from Texas. I've only been to Texas one time in my life, and that was to go to Dallas, and that was back in the mid 90s for my spring break. And of course, as a kid, you don't really think of stuff like this like you do now. But based on the comments that I have received from my subscribers, they literally said Vidor, Texas is probably one of the most racist places in America. It's also still known for its sundown towns. Now, I know that certain places in Massachusetts still honor the sundown town system. And in case you've been living under a rock, basically sundown towns meant that, especially back in the day during Jim Crow, that black people could not be in a certain part of town that was majority white once the sun went down. If you were caught, or if you were still in a certain part of town as a black person back in those times, good luck on making it home alive. That's basically what it is. And in 2019, Vidor, Texas still honors that sundown town narrative based on what I've heard. Now, I came across this article on, I guess you can say it's a blog post, and it was made by a individual. It was made by a white guy, and he was talking about his experience going through Vidor, Texas. And based on what I've read, I would not even want to fly over that town, let alone drive through it. Based on what my subscribers have said and what I've read so far in this article. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this article. It's a pretty lengthy article. So lengthy, in fact, they said it's going to take me 11 minutes to get through the entire thing. Now, this article was posted on August the 5th of this year, so it's fairly recent. And I'm glad I could find a recent one because the last article that I saw was from 2006. And when I was reading through that one and then skimming through this one, they didn't really change. Now, you got to think, that was written back in 2006, and the one that I'm about to read to you now was written in 2019. A 13-year difference, and they pretty much say the same exact thing. So I'm going to go ahead and read this article. It says, I grew up in the most hateful town in America. Welcome to Vidor, a town most famous for its racism, by Justin Ward. When folks ask me where I'm from, now let me correct myself. I thought he was traveling through there. He's from there. He says, when folks ask me where I'm from, I have a stock answer. You've probably never heard of it. And if you have, whatever you heard probably wasn't good. Vidor, Texas is a little strip of fast food restaurants and gas stations that bisects Interstate 10 at the midway point on its journey from sea to shining sea. It's a place where you stop to stretch your legs, void your bladder, and scarf down something greasy before moseying on to someplace better like Biloxi. With a population of about 11,000, Vidor is primarily famous for two things. The first is country music, because Vidor is where the singer George Jones was living that time he drunk drove his tractor to the liquor store because his wife hid his car keys. My town also produced a few B-list country stars like Clay Walker and Tracy Byrd. The second thing that Vidor is known for is considerably less wholesome, and that is racism. Vidor was once what they called a sundown town, or a white flight suburb of the much larger and more racially diverse city of Beaumont. Black people could pass through unscathed so long as they were gone come sunset. These towns usually had a sign that had said something to the effect of whites only after dark. It was rumored that Vidor used to have a sign like this. I've heard stories from older folks who claim to have actually seen it posted alongside the railroad tracks or out by the highway. The generic sundown town sign was a formal, simple statement of policy like no parking after 5 p.m. Vidor signs were not. According to legend, the sign said in big painted letters, "Nigger, don't let the sun set on your black ass." Not that the sign was really necessary. Vidor's reputation was deterrent enough. If you were a black man traveling through town in the bad old days and you got a flat, the smart move would be to ride on a rim until you reach the city limit. In an interview with CNN, a 62-year-old man from Beaumont recalled an incident that happened when he was a teen in the 1970s. He and his friends were changing a tire in Vidor when a white policeman threatened them. According to the CNN story, the white policeman said, "Well, let me tell you, you boys better rap and get out of here because I'm going to go to that next exit and come back around and you better be gone." In the same story, the reporter talked to a county official who claimed there hasn't been a Klan here in 30 years. Anyone who lives in Vidor knows that this is a lie. My hometown had all the usual fraternal clubs one might expect. Kiwanis, the Masons, the Evening Optimists, the Elks, and the Rotary Club. But it also had the Klan. However, the invisible empire, quote unquote, largely stayed true to their name. I've heard that during the decade before I was born, the Klan was much more brazen about the whole thing. There are apocryphal stories about roadside cross burning, signs that said Klan country, and even a KKK bookstore on Main Street. I can't personally attest to any of that. I never witnessed a single burned cross, but I did occasionally run across Klansmen in full regalia. Once, when we were making our weekly pilgrimage from church to the mediocre Mexican place in town, I looked out the window and there they were. About a dozen Klansmen in hoods were just standing there on the side of the road holding signs that said, "Be a man, join the Klan," next to a yellow school bus. One was dangling a banana from a cane fishing pole. I'll leave you to figure out the symbolism of that one. When I was about 17, I randomly met a kid who was apparently the scion of some local Klan big shot. My friend and I were at a Halloween party by the river in the Peckerwood section of North Vidor. Oddly enough, there was a black kid there, too, but he didn't stay for long. Around Christmas time, jolly old Santa Claus made an appearance at his junior high school game to bring cheer to all the good little white girls and boys. The Klansman's son, who was around 12, was the younger brother of the guy hosting the party. He thought it would be funny to give his black guest a scare by dressing up in a Klan getup that he just happened to have lying around. It wasn't a normal white robe or bed sheet with holes cut in it. It was a well-made in green like the leaders wear. The black kid hightailed it out of there, after which the little bastard popped his hood off and they all died laughing. The weirdest incident happened to my brother around Christmas time. I read that part already. It says most of the time the Klansmen kept a pretty low profile, but you couldn't live in a town that small and not see signs of them around. Their home base was Gary's Coffee Shop, a 24-hour diner on Main next to the highway. The bathrooms were covered in Klan graffiti scrawled in childish chicken scratch. My friends and I would go there at 2 a.m. to chain smoke and drink bottomless cups of bad coffee. I can't say I overheard a Grand Kleagle talking Klan business with a most exalted warlock, but I did find one of their business cards on the table once. It listed the phone number and address of their clavern 20 miles up the road over in Mauriceville, where my Uncle Boyce had his crawdad farm. And when I say that they were mostly inconspicuous, there is one notable exception. In the early 90s, they made their presence known in a big way, and the whole country took notice. When I was still in middle school, Vidor became a battleground for the kind of fight that hadn't been seen since the Civil Rights Movement. The tiny town was thrust into the national spotlight after an attempt to integrate its all-white housing projects met resistance from locals as well as Klan groups from around the state. A battle over integration raged for more than a year, starting in the fall of 1992. Now look at that. That's in the early 90s, when integration on a pretty much a national scale as a collective was already been passed for decades, but they were still segregated even in the early 90s. Housing authorities announced that they planned to move black families in, prompting a mass Klan demonstration at the county courthouse in Orange, as well as several smaller marches and rallies in Vidor itself. Mayor Ruth Rhodes claimed the KKK were outsiders. Many were, but they also had plenty of local allies and sympathizers. In the documentary The Least of My Brothers, the leader of the Knights of the White Camellia, who was from a town an hour west of Vidor, said that they were called in by people they knew. The following year, in February, 2 black men moved into the projects and stayed for 6 months. One of the men, Bill Simpson, whose friends in the projects in the local church recall as a gentle giant, was murdered in a robbery shortly after returning to Beaumont. That summer, the housing authorities tried again. They moved in 2 single black women with young children from Louisiana, thinking that they might get more sympathy. They were wrong. Quite a few of the housing projects welcomed their neighbors, just as they had Bill Simpson. Others were considerably less kind, such as Vidor village resident Edith Marie Johnson. Johnson brandished a baseball bat, which she threatened to use on both the women and their children, as well as the many nigger lovers in the projects. The Klan escalated its campaign of terror and intimidation. Charles Lee, the Grand Dragon of the WCK, offered a $50 bounty to white teens to beat up the black residents of the projects. They would drive past in a repurposed school bus with assault weapons poking out of it. One Klan member, James Hall of Mauriceville, bragged that he had personally commissioned Simpson's murder. He told residents that he had 500 pounds of explosives and a bus that he would use to blow the whole place sky high. The women left just after 2 weeks. In the fall, the President Clinton Departments of Housing and Urban Development, also known as HUD, under Henry Cisneros, took direct control over the federally subsidized projects, evoking many of the themes of the 1960s. The Klan billed itself as the white David taking on the federal Goliath. The government tried again in the January of 1994, moving in 4 families under the cover of darkness while U.S. Marshals provided protection. A year later, 1 family had already moved out, and 2 more were planning to. They faced the same threats and harassments as those before them. A teen was arrested on the charge of misdemeanor terrorist threat for wielding a knife and telling one of the women he was going to gut her and her nigger babies. This is some wild shit right here about this one town. I'm so glad I'm coming across this and I'm able to bring this to y'all. The more horrible aspects of this particular story were largely unknown to me at the time. After all, I was only about 11 when this went down. My parents didn't take me to the rallies, so I experienced the story in the same way everyone else did, through my television. It was surreal to see my little one-horse town become the subject of a national media feeding frenzy. The whole thing made great fodder for the daytime talk shows that loved nothing more than trashy drama, and Klan stories were always hot. Phil Donahue hosted a panel discussion with a Texas Klan leader, a black separatist, and for a dash of credibility, an actual county housing official. Now, I wonder, just by listening to that part where it said black separatist, I wonder if that was Dr. Khalid Muhammad, and I think it was, because I remember watching that interview. But Khalid Muhammad, it's amazing they call him a black separatist, but that's far from what he was, but that's what they're going to believe. That's what they're going to always label him. Not to be outdone, Montel Williams did an episode live from the Julie Rogers Theater in Beaumont titled The All-White Town That Keeps Blacks Out. The only thing I remember about the episode was that a Klan supporter in the audience was wearing a Lone Star feed cap advertising the feed store up the road from my house. What I remember vividly from that time, though, was the episode of A Current Affair titled The Most Hateful Town in America, wherein they sent a black man with a hidden camera to town. They actually didn't get much this way. Someone yelled a slur at him while driving by, but when he went to a local church, he was received quite warmly by the congregation. Their mistake most likely was sending him to one of the more fancier, more civilized churches. For the good dirt, they should have had him visit the backwoods variety for folks who do their praying in an aluminum building. Based on my own experience, the episode also didn't necessarily mean that everyone at the church was thrilled about him being there. Once the youth minister at my church, Brother David, told me that he wasn't a racist. He said there are black people and then there are N-words. Why does that sound like the thing from what Chris Rock said during his stand-up? Now, I don't know when Chris Rock did that line there, but if this line, in which I just heard, came before then, I wonder if that's where Chris Rock got it from. Now, I'm not saying that Chris Rock could have got it from this person or was the other way around, but somebody let me know, when did Chris Rock do that stand-up when that line was uttered? Because it doesn't specify what date, because they could have easily watched Chris Rock and got it from him. Or, I don't know. He actually said in words, not nigger. When my church friend Chris told his dad, a deacon, about a fine black girl he saw at the mall, his dad told him he would beat his ass if he ever brought a nigger home. Ultimately, to get the money footage, the showrunners eventually went to Gary's after asking someone in town where they could find the Klan. I don't remember exactly what the two men said either, but they were Klansmen, so use your imagination. In the CNN story I mentioned earlier, the reporter notes that a billboard was placed along the highway to attract black families, quote unquote. I remember seeing that same sign on the way home from college back when my parents still lived there. It had a stock photo of 4 kids, including one black girl, and read Vidor, a great place to live. I chuckled a little bit. Hey, at least they're trying. And that's no different than what they be doing when they try to advertise quote unquote diversity nowadays. If there's one thing coastal media elites love more than talking down or to demonizing Southern white trash, it's a nice redemption story that reaffirms their ideas of the ceaseless forward march of progress. The author of that CNN piece wrote, in fairness, Vidor had changed, at least somewhat. It's no longer a city that actively shuns blacks. In fact, African Americans often shop there, even if very few are residents. A year prior, in 2005, the Associated Press published a piece about Vidor welcoming black victims of Hurricane Katrina. After reciting a litany of past horrors, the reporter told stories about white folks opening their hearts to black people in their time of need. That same year, there was a hate crime in the town. The home of a mixed-race couple was burned down and racial slurs were found on their detached garage. I don't mean to be cynical. Vidor is full of lovely people who are gentle, good, and Christian in the truest sense of the word. It also has more than its fair share of the other kind of people, and I can't rightly say which represents the quote-unquote true Vidor. As late as 2003, the Klan was still holding events in Vidor public buildings. A post on the white supremacist forum Stormfront advertised a lecture and viewing of the Ku Klux Klan memorabilia. No non-whites allowed, no Jews or Jews media allowed, to be held in the Vidor Community Center to commemorate the anniversary of their fight against integration. Vidor also apparently has at least one black family living there, or it did in 2009. While researching this story, I came across a yearbook of a black student taking part in a Vidor tradition more sacred than barbecue or even football, dressing up like a woman for a cheap laugh. It was a time of hope and change. Obama was president and Terrence Smith was crowned queen of the Vidor High 2009 mock beauty pageant. But the presence of black people doesn't mean the absence of racism in Vidor. James Byrd Jr. was dragged to death behind a truck just a stone's throw away in Jasper, a town that's more than half black. And I have to wonder what life was really like for Terrence Smith. I read some comments in forums from around that time that also claimed Vidor had truly changed and that you would get beat up in VHS if you said the N-word. If that's actually the case, it would really be something. At least at the very least, Smith was obviously popular enough in school to win the contest, and he stuck around long enough to be in the yearbook. I guess that's some kind of progress. We never had a single black kid in our class when I was in school, but we did come close one time. I never saw him, but word around the field house was that he was joining the football team and he'd be coming to practice. I walked in on 3 of my teammates huddled around one of their lockers giggling. They were making nooses out of shoelaces. This right here, and that's the end of the article. This right here was a very interesting piece about this town. It makes me glad that I did that piece that talked about this town, but it didn't go into depth about it. But I also have to shout out my subscribers for literally giving me a little bit of a backstory about this place, because then it led me to this particular narrative that was just put out there. And this is, like I said, this is written up by a person that grew up there, that was born and raised there. So they have a first-hand glance of what this town is all about. But like I said, I would not want to fly over this town. This town just sounds like it just needs to burn, like, or just fall and just cave into the earth and maybe possibly start over, if that. It reminds me of Owsley County. Well, Owsley County is just flat broke. And just that place just needs to be a part of a landfill. Matter of fact, it looks like a landfill, to be quite honest. But this was a very interesting piece that was written. I'm glad that I found it, and I'm glad that I was able to read it. Like I said, it was going to be a lengthy piece, but I said I have to recite it to y'all because I need y'all to hear what this is all about, especially since so many people uttered, that they've driven through this town before. They didn't even stop. They just drove right on through. You heard it right there where it said that if your car was to break down in Vidor, You just better hope that you can get to the next town over on the rim. That's how serious it is. And do you know how hard it is to drive on the rim tire of your car? It's hard, especially since you can mess that rim up and you will most likely kick up some sparks. And if it hits the wrong way, your car can catch on fire and possibly blow up. That's how serious and intense they were for keeping or wanting to keep this town the way that it is. And it sounds like to me, even today, the remnants of back then is still there, especially since back in 1992, they were still segregated. In 1992 wasn't that long ago. That was 28 years ago. So so very interesting story. I'm glad I came across it. Y'all let me know what y'all think about this down in the comments, and I'll talk to you in the next one.